The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the windows of the imposing Montgomery mansion, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs and mahogany furniture. Lord Sebastian Montgomery, the Duke of Wexley, held a freshly written invitation between his fingers, the thick paper underscoring the importance of the event. His birthday was approaching, and as tradition dictated, London's high society eagerly awaited the ball at his residence. However, this time, an unexpected name appeared on the guest list. Lady Vivian Sinclair, a reclusive widow whom no one in his circle seemed to know. "Don't tell me you've finally succumbed to the charms of a lady, Your Grace," teased Charlotte, his younger sister, as she poured herself a cup of tea. Sebastian raised an eyebrow, a well-practiced gesture of skepticism. "It's hard to succumb to charms I've never encountered. I've never seen this woman before, but I heard she recently arrived in London and appears to have some connection to our family." Charlotte stirred her tea slowly, casting him a piercing glance. "A mysterious widow? How thrilling! I do hope she's at least beautiful." Sebastian chuckled softly, but deep down, something unsettled him. He was not a man given to superstition, but the sudden interest of this unknown woman in his family, and the fact that no one seemed to know much about her, was enough to spark his suspicion. Lady Vivian Sinclair held the invitation with trembling fingers, her eyes fixed on the golden embossed Montgomery crest on the envelope. Her heart pounded. The last time she had set foot in that house, she had still worn braids and childish dresses. Now she was returning under a name that was not hers by birth, carrying secrets that could change everything. "Are you truly going to attend?" asked her lady's companion, Miss Farrow, as she helped fasten Vivian's dark hair into a discreet updo. Vivian took a deep breath. "There is no turning back now. If I want answers, I must face the Duke." Miss Farrow gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "And if he doesn't believe you?" "Then, my dear, I shall have to convince him." Vivian's lips curved into a subtle smile. "And something tells me the Duke of Wexley will not be an easy adversary." The night of the ball arrived with all the splendor expected of a Montgomery event. The grand hall shimmered under the glow of chandeliers, and the ladies glided through the room in embroidered silk gowns, while the gentlemen adjusted their white gloves and discussed business over sips of brandy. Sebastian, impeccably dressed, in a black tailcoat, greeted the guests with a practiced smile, but his attention remained fixed on the entrance. When Lady Vivian Sinclair stepped into the hall, a subtle hush spread through the room, as if the very air had shifted. Her deep blue gown accentuated her fair complexion, and her gaze, steady and enigmatic, locked directly onto the Duke's. Charlotte, standing beside him, let out a dramatic sigh. "Well, at least she's beautiful," Sebastian did not respond. Something about this woman stirred within him a disquieting sense of déjà vu, a feeling he could not explain. Vivian walked toward the Duke, her heart pounding in her chest. She inclined her head slightly in greeting. "Your Grace, Lady Sinclair." Sebastian bowed formally, his eyes scanning her face with analytical intensity. "It is a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." "The pleasure is all mine," she replied, gripping her champagne glass firmly. "Although I believe this meeting has been delayed far too long." Sebastian narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Vivian wetted her lips before speaking the words that would change everything. "I am your cousin." The silence that followed was absolute, and then, as if an invisible orchestra had split his life in two, Sebastian Montgomery's world shifted irrevocably. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls of the grand ballroom were closing in around Sebastian. Lady Vivian's statement hung in the air like a bolt of lightning, poised to strike. His cousin. Impossible. He would have known. He would have remembered. But he did not remember. "My cousin?" The word felt strange on his tongue. He could not suppress the skeptical look in his eyes. Lady Vivian, however, did not waver. She held her glass with unwavering confidence, a glint of determination in her brown eyes. "Yes, Your Grace. I know it sounds absurd, but I can prove it." Charlotte, watching the scene unfold with the enthusiasm of someone witnessing the most scandalous of dramas, covered her mouth with a fan. Oh, Sebastian, you can't simply ignore such an interesting claim. At least let the poor girl speak before throwing her out of your house. Sebastian ignored his sister's teasing. Very well. Prove it. Minutes later, they were in the Montgomery Mansion's library. The music of the ball echoed faintly, muffled by thick walls, as Sebastian studied Vivian intently. The candlelight flickered over her face, illuminating her porcelain skin. She pulled a small silver locket from the pocket of her gown and extended it toward him. "This belonged to my mother," she said. Sebastian took the object hesitantly. Upon opening it, he found a miniature portrait of a young woman with chestnut hair and eyes identical to Vivian's. His heart pounded harder. He knew that face. "Lady Genevieve?" His voice was hoarse. "But that makes no sense. She died years ago." "Yes. And what no one knows is that before she died, she had a daughter." Vivian clasped her hands in her lap. "Me." Sebastian closed his eyes for a moment. Lady Genevieve Montgomery had been a distant cousin, presumed dead after a shipwreck more than 20 years ago. No one had ever mentioned a child. "How did you survive?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Vivian hesitated briefly, then lifted her chin. "My father was not on the ship. He raised me in secrecy, fearing that the Montgomery family would never accept us. When he passed away, I discovered the truth about my origins. And now, I am here." The Duke studied her closely. His instincts told him she was not lying, but something still felt incomplete. "And why reveal yourself now?" Vivian took a deep breath. "Because there is something you need to know, Your Grace. My mother did not die in the shipwreck. She was murdered." The silence that followed was so thick it could have been cut with a dagger. Sebastian felt his stomach turn. His mind wrestled to process the revelation. Murder? That was impossible. But Vivian gazed at him with an unsettling certainty. And in that moment, for the first time that night, the Duke of Wexley realized that his life would never be the same again. The clock above the fireplace struck midnight when Sebastian finally moved. Until then, he had remained motionless, as if Vivian's words had frozen his body and mind. Murder. It was too grave an accusation to be spoken lightly. He rose slowly, his expression hard. "Do you have proof?" Vivian did not waver in the face of his cold tone. Instead, she reached into her velvet purse and withdrew a worn leather journal. "This is my mother's diary. I found it hidden among her belongings, along with letters she never managed to send." Sebastian took the journal, feeling the weight of truth between his fingers. He skimmed through the first pages and immediately recognized Genevieve's elegant handwriting. At first, the entries were trivial: social events, new dresses, impressions of gentlemen courting her friends. But as he turned the pages, the accounts grew darker. "Something is wrong. Someone is watching me. I know it's not my imagination. If anything happens to me, it was no accident." The Duke tightened his grip on the journal, his jaw clenching. "If this is true—" "It is true," Vivian interrupted, her gaze piercing. "And if we dig deeper, we may discover who killed her." The next day, Sebastian stood before his trusted steward, Lord Richard Holloway, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes for details. Others often overlooked. "I want you to investigate the records of Lady Genevieve's shipwreck," Sebastian ordered, crossing his arms. "Find out who was on the ship with her and if there were any mentions of suspicious circumstances." Holloway arched an eyebrow. "Chasing ghosts, Your Grace?" "Chasing the truth." The steward nodded. "I'll begin the search immediately." Sebastian sighed and rubbed his temples. Ever since Vivian had appeared, his life had been turned upside down. He had yet to decide if he could fully trust her, but one thing was certain: he could not ignore her. Vivian wandered through the Montgomery Estates gardens, her fingers idly brushing the petals of the roses. The night was cool, and the breeze caressed her loose hair. But even surrounded by such beauty, she felt restless. Footsteps sounded behind her. "I expected to find you here." She turned to see Sebastian, his features shadowed in the dim lantern light. And what will you say now? That I'm a fraud? She asked, a touch of irony in her voice. Sebastian hesitated, then smirked. I haven't decided yet. But you intrigue me, Vivian Sinclair. And that, my dear, is dangerous. Vivian smiled softly, but her eyes held a secret even Sebastian could not guess. Because there was something she had yet to tell him. Something that could change everything. The morning mist lingered over London when Sebastian Montgomery received a report from Holloway. He opened the envelope with steady fingers, his eyes scanning the precise handwriting of his steward. The sinking of the Lady Eleanor was not an ordinary accident. Reports indicate that one of the crew members survived but disappeared before giving testimony. Additionally, Lady Genevieve's name was removed from official records days after the incident. Someone did not want her to be remembered. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. With every new piece of information, the story grew darker. Who had so much interest in erasing Genevieve from history? So my mother truly was silenced. Vivian turned the pages of the journal, her expression distant. They had gathered once more, in the library where candlelight flickered, casting shadows across the imposing furniture. If this is true, it means the person who killed her may still be among us, Sebastian said, leaning back in his chair. Vivian lifted her gaze. And worse, they may know that we're investigating. Sebastian nodded slowly. Which is why we must be careful. Caution did not stop my mother from being killed. Vivian's voice was steady, but her eyes gleamed with a mix of anger and sorrow. Sebastian studied her for a moment. He could not deny her courage. It was rare to meet someone who challenged him so directly, who did not shrink beneath his authority, and, against his better judgment, he was beginning to admire her for it. That night, as the city slept, a shadow moved through the gardens of the Montgomery estate. Vivian, unable to sleep, gazed out her window just in time to see a figure slipping between the rose bushes. Her heart pounded. With a swift motion, she grabbed a shawl and silently made her way down the corridor, descending the stairs without a sound. When she reached the garden, the figure was already vanishing into the trees. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice firm but low. No response, only the rustling of leaves, and then a noise behind her. Vivian spun around too quickly. Hand grabbed her wrist, yanking her into the darkness. She tried to scream, but another hand clamped over her mouth. And then, everything went black. The silence in Montgomery Manor was shattered when Charlotte burst into Sebastian's study, pale as a sheet. "Vivian is missing." Sebastian looked up from the report he was reading. "What?" "She's not in her chambers nor anywhere in the, house. The servants are searching, but no one has seen her since last night." The Duke stood so abruptly that his chair nearly toppled over. A dark premonition settled in his chest. "Have my horse prepared." His voice was steel. Charlotte hesitated. "Sebastian, what if something terrible has happened?" He met her gaze, his own dark and resolute. "Then I will find whoever did this, and I will make them pay." Vivian awoke with a bitter taste in her mouth. The world around her spun, and it took a few seconds to realize she was lying on a cold, wooden floor. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and seawater. She tried to move, but found her wrists bound. Her heart pounded. Where the hell was she? A door creaked. Footsteps echoed in the small cabin where she was held. Then a man emerged. From the shadows. Vivian swallowed hard. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The man smiled. It was an empty, cruel smile. "The same thing we wanted from your mother." Fear spread through Vivian's body like poison. She was in danger, and if Sebastian didn't find her in time, she might never leave this place alive. Sebastian rode like a man possessed, his eyes scanning the streets of London, his heart hammering in his chest. Vivian had vanished without a trace, but he would not let her fate be the same as Genevieve's. No matter what it took, he would find her. The biting wind whipped against Sebastian's face as his horse galloped down the muddy road. Each pounding hoofbeat echoed like a war drum inside his head. The thought of Vivian's disappearance burned in his mind, fueling a cold, relentless fury. He would find her, and if someone had harmed her, there would be no place in hell deep enough to hide from his wrath. "Faster, Wexley," shouted Lord Richard Holloway, riding beside him. "If the lead is correct, she's being held." In a warehouse near the docks, Sebastian only nodded, his jaw tight. He refused to entertain the possibility that they were too late. Vivian pulled at the ropes binding her wrists, feeling her skin burn with friction. Her captor had left moments ago, but she knew he would return. The door burst open. "Trying to escape, Lady Sinclair?" The man taunted, crossing his arms. She glared at him, hatred burning in her gaze. "What do you want?" The man stepped closer, crouching before her. His breath reeked of rum and tobacco. "I want you to stay quiet and forget about your mother's story." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "So she was murdered." The man chuckled darkly. "My dear, there are things the Montgomerys were never meant to uncover." Before he could say more, a thunderous crash made the door tremble. "Vivian!" Sebastian's voice roared through the room like a storm. The kidnapper shot to his feet, drawing a knife. But before he could react, the door was kicked open, and the Duke stormed in like an avenging force. Vivian's eyes shone. "Sebastian." The Duke didn't hesitate. With a powerful strike, he sent the man sprawling to the floor. The kidnapper scrambled to fight back, but Sebastian was already on him, his fists landing with ruthless precision. Vivian had never seen such fury in a man's eyes. "No one touches her!" Sebastian growled, delivering the final blow. The man collapsed unconscious. Holloway entered moments later, grabbing the criminal by the collar. "I'll take him for questioning. We'll find out who sent him." Sebastian barely acknowledged. "Him." He dropped to his knees before Vivian. "Are you hurt?" She nodded, her eyes glistening with an emotion she couldn't name. "You came for me?" He took her hands in his, holding them firmly. "Always." Vivian's heart raced. For the first time in her life, she was no longer alone. Montgomery Manor buzzed with preparations for the evening's masquerade ball. From his library, Sebastian watched as servants hurried down the halls, hanging lanterns and carrying gleaming silver trays. But his mind was elsewhere. The interrogation of Vivian's kidnapper had revealed only one name: Lord Redgrave. A man of wealth and influence, respected in high society, yet now a key figure in the mystery of Genevieve's death. If Redgrave has something to hide, tonight is the perfect opportunity to expose him, Sebastian murmured, eyes fixed on the black mask resting on his desk. He would get his answers, and if that meant dancing with the enemy, so be it. Vivian's heart pounded beneath the tight bodice of her deep red gown. The masks made the evening feel like a dangerous game, where allies and enemies alike could hide behind seductive disguises. When Sebastian found her in the ballroom, his gaze swept over her, filled with something between approval and something more. Something that, for a moment, made her forget they were there to investigate. "You look stunning." Vivian smiled, but her voice remained steady. "And you look like a man about to fight a duel." Sebastian extended his hand. "Shall we dance, Lady Sinclair? And find a murderer?" As they spun across the dance floor, Sebastian leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Redgrave is near the fireplace. He watches the guests too closely, like he's searching for someone." Vivian cast a discreet glance. The middle-aged man sipped his wine calmly, but his eyes roamed the room like a hunter seeking prey. "If he's guilty, he won't leave any clues easily. Then we'll make him slip up." Sebastian pulled her closer. "Are you ready to play?" She lifted her chin, a defiant gleam in her eyes. "Always." The sound of violins filled the ballroom, but to Vivian and Sebastian the music was merely background noise in the dangerous game they played. Their eyes flickered between masked guests, searching for any sign of unease in Lord Redgrave. Sebastian held Vivian's hand firmly, guiding her through the dance. "He's watching us. Good." She smiled, but her voice held a challenge. "Then let's give him something to worry about." Vivian slipped from Sebastian's arms and walked gracefully to the wine table, where Redgrave was finishing his glass. The man lifted his eyes as she approached, a polite smile curving his lips. Lady Sinclair, I presume? A stunning vision on such an enchanting evening. Vivian tilted her head, studying every nuance of his expression. Enchanting indeed. But I wonder, for some, it might also be dangerous. Redgrave's smile didn't waver, but Vivian noticed how his fingers tightened slightly around his glass. Dangerous? My dear, what could be safer than a ballroom full of respectable lords? She stepped closer, narrowing the distance between them. That depends on how many of those lords have secrets to hide. For a fleeting moment, something, fear, anger, flashed in Redgrave's eyes. Then he let out a soft chuckle. Ah, Lady Sinclair, you have quite the provocative spirit. A trait of the family, I believe. Vivian's heart stopped for a second. He knew. Across the ballroom, Sebastian observed the exchange. He didn't like the gleam in Redgrave's eyes, or the way he stood so close to Vivian. What is she doing? Charlotte murmured beside him. Waiting for the right moment to intervene, Charlotte sighed. Or waiting to tear her away from that man's grasp. Sebastian narrowed his eyes. Don't be ridiculous. Of course, Charlotte smirked. But if you need me, I can always accidentally spill a glass of wine on him. Sebastian didn't answer. He was too busy resisting the urge to storm over and pull Vivian out of this dangerous game. Vivian held Redgrave's gaze. You knew my mother, didn't you? The man swirled the wine in his glass as if choosing his words. I knew Genevieve, yes. A captivating woman, and a foolish one. A chill ran down Vivian's spine. What do you mean? He leaned in slightly, his lips curling into a cold smile. I mean that certain questions lead to answers that come at a cost. A shiver of unease coursed through her, but before she could respond, a hand closed around her elbow. If you'll excuse me, Redgrave. Sebastian's voice was low but laced with warning. I believe this dance belongs to me. The two men locked eyes for a tense moment. Redgrave smiled. Of course, Your Grace. We have the whole night to talk. Sebastian pulled Vivian away, his body tense with barely restrained anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? She lifted her chin, looking for answers, and nearly getting yourself trapped by a snake. Vivian wrenched her arm free, her breath coming fast. Sebastian, he knows something, and I'm going to find out what. He grabbed her wrist, his eyes burning into hers. Then we do it together. Vivian's breath hitched. For the first time, she felt she wasn't fighting alone. And for the first time, she realized how much that meant. Sebastian and Vivian stood side by side in the Montgomery Manor library, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows over the open pages of Genevieve's diary. The faded words seemed to whisper secrets from the past, but one phrase in particular caught Vivian's attention. The key lies in the heart of the rose, she murmured, running her fingers over the page. Sebastian frowned. What does that mean? Vivian bit her lower lip, thinking. My mother adored roses. When I was a child, I remember she had a gold brooch with a carved rose. Sebastian's gaze sharpened. Does that brooch still exist? Vivian hesitated. It was one of the few things I inherited. I keep it in my room. Sebastian stood abruptly. Then let's retrieve it. Now. As they climbed the stairs, a strange sensation prickled at the back of Vivian's neck, an eerie feeling that they were being watched. Are you certain no one else knows about the diary? She asked in a hushed voice. Sebastian pressed his lips together. Only Holloway and Charlotte, but given recent events, I wouldn't trust anyone else. When they reached Vivian's room, she walked to her vanity and opened the drawer where she kept her jewelry. Her heart stopped. No. What is it? Sebastian stepped closer. She turned to him, eyes wide with alarm. The brooch. It's gone. The silence in the room was suffocating. Someone has been here, Sebastian said, his voice taut with barely restrained fury. And they knew exactly what to look for. Vivian clenched her fists. That means we're close to the truth. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. Or it means we're in danger. Vivian met his gaze head on. That has never stopped me before. He exhaled sharply, then reached out, his fingers gently tilting her chin up. I know. And that's exactly what terrifies me. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Sebastian's lips were too close, his breath warm against her skin. The air between them thickened with something unspoken, something dangerous. Then, a noise outside the room made them both step back. Someone was in the house. Sebastian swiftly drew the small dagger he always carried and motioned for Vivian to stay behind him. They stepped out of the room, descending the stairs in silence, their footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. Then a shadow moved in the hall below. With a swift, controlled motion, Sebastian lunged, grabbing the figure by the collar and pressing the blade to his throat. "Who the hell are you?" The man gasped, hands raised in surrender. "Please." "I was only sent to deliver a message." Sebastian narrowed his eyes. "By whom?" The man swallowed hard. "Lord Redgrave. He said if you want the brooch, you must meet him tomorrow at midnight in Hyde Park's Rose Garden." Vivian and Sebastian exchanged a look. "A midnight meeting in the dark?" she murmured. "Sounds like a trap." Sebastian smirked, but his eyes remained cold. "Then we'll make it a trap for him." Hyde Park was shrouded in darkness when Sebastian and Vivian arrived, dressed in black to blend into the night. A creeping mist slithered across the ground, making the Rose Garden, a place once known for its beauty, feel like the setting of a conspiracy. Sebastian held Vivian's hand firmly. "Stay close to me." She nodded, her eyes scanning for the slightest movement. Then, a silhouette emerged from the rose bushes. Lord Redgrave. And between his fingers, gleaming under the pale moonlight, was Genevieve's brooch. "What a lovely couple," Redgrave mused, twirling the brooch between his fingers. The determined orphan and the noble duke. So romantic. Sebastian stepped forward. "If you're trying to amuse us, you've chosen the wrong audience." Redgrave smirked, but his eyes remained cold. Always so impatient, Wexley. "But yes, let's get to the point." He lifted the brooch and pressed a small mechanism at its base. A soft click echoed in the silent night. The back of the brooch popped open, revealing a tiny, aged slip of paper. Vivian gasped. "A hidden message?" Redgrave nodded. "Your mother, my dear Lady Sinclair, was clever. But not clever enough?" Sebastian's fists clenched. "What does it say?" Redgrave chuckled darkly. "Ah, Duke, always so direct. But don't worry, I'll let you read it with your own eyes." And then he dropped the brooch and drew a pistol. "Right after I kill you both." Time slowed. Sebastian lunged before Redgrave could fire, tackling him to the ground. The gun exploded, the shot ripping through the night, striking a marble statue nearby. Vivian snatched the brooch and ran, fear and determination warring in her chest. "Sebastian!" The Duke pinned Redgrave down, his fury burning like fire. "You killed Genevieve!" Redgrave laughed, even as his face was pressed into the dirt. "Of course I did. She knew too much. Just like the two of you now." Sebastian punched him hard. "You will never touch her." Redgrave tried to laugh again, but his body went limp. Vivian rushed forward, clutching the fragile slip of paper between trembling fingers. "Sebastian." "The message." He took it from her, his eyes scanning the words. Then they widened in shock. "It can't be." Epilogue. The final truth. The rain pattered gently against the windows of Montgomery Manor. The fire in the library crackled softly, casting flickering shadows over the walls as Sebastian and Vivian sat, staring at the note that had changed everything. Redgrave did not act alone. "The true traitor is among us. Look where it all began." Sebastian ran a hand through his dark hair, his eyes fixed on the yellowed paper. Where it all began. Vivian, still holding her mother's brooch, whispered, "The house where she grew up." Sebastian's gaze sharpened. The old Montgomery estate in the countryside. They exchanged a look. The answer was there. 2 days later, they rode through the rusted gates of the abandoned Montgomery estate, the place that had once been Genevieve's home. The scent of aged wood and dust hung thick in the air. Vivian ran her fingers over the shelves of an old desk. If my mother hid a message in the brooch, she may have left more clues. Sebastian was inspecting a painting when he heard a soft creak beneath his boots. He knelt, running his hand over the wooden floorboards. There's something here. With a firm tug, he pulled up a loose floorboard. Wrapped inside a piece of aged fabric was a bundle of letters. Vivian picked one up, her hands shaking. The name on the envelope made her blood run cold. To my brother. She looked up at Sebastian, her voice barely a whisper. My uncle. Sebastian unfolded another letter, his expression darkening as he read. Genevieve discovered financial fraud within the family, and that her own brother was involved. She planned to expose him. Vivian clutched the letters to her chest. He killed her for it. Before they could say another word, a floorboard creaked behind them. Well, you're more clever than... I thought. Sebastian and Vivian whirled around. Standing at the entrance, his pistol aimed at them, was Lord Alfred Sinclair, Vivian's own uncle. Her stomach twisted. You. The man smiled. You never should have started digging, my dear. Sebastian stepped in front of her. You killed her to protect your dirty money. Lord Sinclair lifted his chin. And to protect the family's honor. Genevieve would have ruined us all. Vivian trembled with rage. You destroyed your own family. Lord Sinclair cocked the pistol. And now I'm afraid I'll have to do the same with you. A gunshot shattered the silence. Lord Sinclair staggered backward, his weapon slipping from his fingers. Vivian gasped, spinning toward Sebastian. He stood with his own smoking pistol in hand, his expression as cold as ice. Lord Sinclair collapsed to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder. You bastard! Sebastian stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. You will never touch her again. Months later. London's high society was ablaze with scandal. Lord Sinclair had been imprisoned, and Genevieve's name had been cleared. At Montgomery Manor, Vivian stood in the garden, inhaling the crisp morning air, feeling lighter than she had in years. Familiar presence approached. Sebastian, his gaze softened as he watched her. It's over, he murmured. Vivian turned to him, a teasing smile on her lips. Almost, he arched a brow. Oh, and what's missing? She bit her lip, pretending to ponder. Perhaps a certain duke admitting he's in love. Sebastian let out a mock sigh. Ah, so the burden falls on me? Vivian crossed her arms. If you want me to stay, yes. His smirk softened into something real, something undeniable. He took her hand, pulling her close. Then stay, Vivian, because I can't imagine this house without you. Her heart pounded. Neither can I. And when his lips finally met hers, she knew. Despite all the secrets, dangers and mysteries, her home would always be by his side.